Joblessness data from the UK have risen in prominence after the Bank of England in August linked a future rate hike to a drop in the unemployment rate to below 7%. In July, this rate fell to 7.7%. So what does a sustained figure of 7.7 this month mean for the UK economy? Joining me down the line to discuss is Rob Wood. Rob, we've just had two big UK data releases, inflation and unemployment, which showed no dramatic improvement, but at least things weren't getting worse. Despite all the news that the UK economy is recovering, is it fair to say that the UK still has a long way to go before the recovery feels like one?
Well, I think for consumers, that's definitely true. Pay is not rising anywhere near as fast as prices. So pay today was up 0.7% year on year. Inflation yesterday was 2.7% year on year. So real incomes are still being squeezed. This recovery is feeding through in business optimism. We're seeing it there. It's feeding through in actually the hard data, the growth figures. We saw growth in the first half of the year at 1% over the first half in total. So there is a recovery going on, but there's still a lot of pressure on household budgets, which means the recovery is probably a bit more fragile than it looks. At the minute, it's entirely dependent on consumption, but consumers are doing that by saving less rather than through their pay rising. So there is still a way to go before it really feels like a recovery.
Some analysts are saying the figures are going the Bank of England's way, but the data also showed that 1.45 million people were working part-time because they could not find full-time jobs, the highest figure since records began in 1992. So with the different ways to interpret these figures, is the emphasis on unemployment as an economic indicator the right way to go?
I think it was the best of all the possible indicators that the bank could have chosen. You're absolutely right to highlight that underemployment, so part-time workers who want to work full-time, is one aspect of that. You also have people on 0 hours contracts or people who would like to work more hours in any job that they're in. You're right that underemployment is probably a better measure of where the labour market is right now and the amount of jobs that the UK needs to create before it returns to something that we can call normal. I think you're right that the focus should be on underemployment. That's something that's pretty hard to calculate. Unemployment is a straightforward, readily available figure, and I think it describes pretty well how far away from normal the UK is. Unemployment is 7.7. Before the crisis, it was 5. There are about 1 million more unemployed people than there were 5 years ago. And I think that describes pretty much everything you need to know about the UK.
Ultimately, some analysts say Wednesday's figures add to evidence that a hike in interest rates could become before 2016, when most analysts suggest the rate would be at Carney's target. But despite the positive implications, a premature hike could also have uncomfortable repercussions for British households. Do you agree?
I think unemployment will fall to the threshold of 7% that the Bank of England have said. That's the point at which they will consider raising interest rates. I think it will fall to that threshold by Q3 2015. That's about a year earlier than the Bank of England's forecast. So yes, I think it will happen. I think today's data consistent with that. You have unemployment a bit below the bank's forecast, and you have jobless claims, which is a leading indicator of unemployment, falling pretty sharply in September and August as well. So I think we'll get there quicker than the bank does. Would an early rate hike be a mistake? Yes, it would. The UK is still, said earlier, miles away from normal. Unemployment is elevated. Output is still 3% lower than it was in 2007. In the US, it's 6% higher, for instance. So the UK has a long way to go, and it doesn't need a rate hike anytime soon.
The pound remains lower against the US dollar after weak US manufacturing data and hopes that a deal to raise the US federal borrowing limit could be reached in time to avert a debt default continue to support demand for the greenback. But supposing the default is avoided, what will be the main drivers of this pair, do you think?
Well, the US is in a better cyclical position than the UK. It's been recovering for a while, and as I said, its output is already 6% above its pre-crisis peak. So my guess would be that the US is likely to tighten policy a bit sooner than the Bank of England will, and that will be one key driver. I mean, the other one is, of course, both countries are still running very big trade deficits. So that's why the sterling, one reason why sterling has depreciated so much and is likely to remain pretty weak.
Rob, lovely to speak to you again. Thank you so much. Well, viewers, we've reached the midway of the trading week, but the TV team have plenty more to bring you, so please do keep clicking back. Goodbye for now.